We are here to chat with Matt from August Burns Red. So Matt, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You have great posture. I like that.
I've been told that before.
Yeah, well, it's important. You know, it says a lot about someone's character.
I'll take it.
There you go. Well, so I know you're getting ready to head out on a Warped Tour and stuff. A lot of last-minute stuff going on. What's kept you busy the past week or two?
Well, I've been practicing for 2 months to get ready for this tour. The last week has been nothing but vacation. So a little bit of both. Cool.
So a couple things I wanted to ask you about as we let those questions come in is, first of all, how did you get involved with the Entertainment Institute, and what can people expect from the workshops you'll be doing this summer on Warped Tour?
It's a good question. I actually know Matt Halpern, who was involved with another organization several years ago. And I worked with them pretty extensively, teaching on tour, as well as, you know, a little bit at home here and there. He called me and asked me if I wanted to be involved with TEI. And since I'll be on the Vans Warped Tour this summer, it makes sense to be a part of it. I like to teach, and I play drums. It's my profession. So the natural, trajectory then is to teach what I love to do, which is playing drums. So I've been preparing some curriculum for the past 2 months to teach. We'll be traveling the whole country. I have curriculum worked out to teach every day, and I try to teach based on what the questions are in each master class or clinic to cater to what people really want to know. I've taken lessons in the past, and it's helped me know what to teach and what not to teach, and when to listen and when to talk, mainly through pretty terrible drum lessons that were overpriced. So I'm excited to work with TEI.
Yeah, well, one question that I was wondering is, presumably one of the reasons why people want a lesson from you is because they like your playing, and everybody's playing, especially with drums, I think, is really highly dependent on the individual. I'm friends with a few people who have recorded you, and they say that you hit extremely hard. Is that something that you can teach? Did that come naturally? Do you hit hard on purpose? Like, talk a little bit about that and how important that is to your personal style.
I think that my playing style is just an extension of who I am. When I sit down in the drum set, I play a certain way, I sit a certain way, think a certain way, and I could be sitting on a chair like I am now, and I'm sitting the same way. So just the style of drumming I have is just, an extension of how I've always been, I guess. So that said, I'm pretty intentional. I'm a pretty intentional person. So when I sit down behind a drum set, I know that I'm hitting tom 1, and I know I'm hitting tom 2, and then I know I'm hitting the crash. And I think when you're rehearsed and you're intentional, the product is pretty consistent and heavy hit.
Cool. Well, got some good questions coming in, so let me get to those. This is a really good question. How do you practice in order to play to the grid as far as recording goes? So, in other words, the best performances in the studio are the ones that require the least editing. How do you go about practicing so that you're that tight when you get in the studio and everything is as close to on the grid as possible?
The first time I recorded, I didn't know what I was doing. I recorded with a guy named Adam D. He plays guitar in Killswitch Engage, and recently won The Price is Right.
Never heard of him.
Yeah. And he's very, very, very picky. He's a perfectionist. So ever since I recorded with him, which was my inaugural recording session, I see my playing in terms of that grid, like you're talking about. For those that aren't familiar with that, when you record audio in a digital format, you're recording sounds that are displayed in what we see as the easiest way possible, which is just peaks. So you have a grid which have equal time markers. When I'm hitting the snare drum, I'm visualizing my snare almost hiding the grid. You know, it's
that transient
it's canceling
is
out.
right on. Yeah.
Yeah, the transient is canceling out the click sound or the grid mark. And so I think 90% of it at least is confidence, knowing that when I go into the studio, I put in the time. If drumming was easy, then of course everyone would be good at it. But if it was easy to become, you know, good at drums, if it took money or if it took the right gear or if it took a year or two, then there would be a lot of good drummers. But my understanding is that it takes a long time, a lot of practice, a lot of personal time in the studio or practice space. So I put in that time. And if I haven't put in that time, I don't play very well in the studio. So my goal is usually to spend a couple months before I even step foot into the studio. That way when I set up my drums and I get tones, I know that my playing is going to be up to par.
And do you practice to a click track?
I do.
Yeah. Another question here. Greetings from Las Cruces, New Mexico. What do you recommend for learning double pedal? What routines should I practice?
There have been times in my career where I've struggled with double bass, and the best way back to zero and then making progress has been to take my drum set apart and start with just the kick drum and then put the snare in and then put the hi-hat in. Take away all the other pieces and just start with the basics. That would be number one. Number two would be following my right hand or my left hand, whichever is your lead hand. A lot of people think that their double bass is only as strong as their feet, but I think that your double bass is only as strong as your lead hand. So if your right hand is weak and you're really focusing on your feet, not your hands, then your feet are going to stagger and stutter. So I usually just keep a nice quarter note or eighth note backbeat, you know, right hand on my ride or my hi-hat, my left hand on my snare, and then I let the feet follow in. Usually you can pick apart what you're struggling with pretty easily by doing that.
Do you, like, so for me personally, my left foot is definitely the weak part of the whole thing. Do you have any suggestions, you know, if anybody else, which I think a lot of people struggle with that, their left foot can't keep up with their right foot, any suggestions on reinforcing that particular weak point?
Mm-hmm. Play along to Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, anything that's pretty basic and catchy. And instead of playing the single hits with your right foot, playing with your left. I do that a lot even with August Burns Red, where there'll be a driving pattern. And I'm actually left foot lead. So I'll switch to my right foot and lead with that foot and vice versa. It's just like anything else. If you're used to using your right hand and you're going to open the doors, you know, brush your teeth, everything with your right hand. If you start to use your left hand, then you start to strengthen it and become a little bit more dynamic with both hands.
Cool. What is the most difficult song you've played and or written?
I figured that question would come up. The answer is the second song on the tour we're about to do. It's a song called The Wake, and I've been nonstop practicing it for 2 months. I recorded the song back in November, and when I recorded it, I wanted to quit playing drums. It was, I get unsettled and sweaty just thinking about it. It's just hard. It's fast, it's intricate, and both of those things aren't necessarily my strengths. There's a lot of fast drummers out there who play way faster than me, and there's a lot of intricate drummers out there. I have a little bit of that in my playing, but it really pushed me. When I recorded the song, I wanted to slow everything down, and JB, my guitarist, said, no, we're going to keep it at 200 beats per minute. We're going to keep those tight kick drum machine gun patterns at 200 beats per minute. And I left the studio wanting to quit. I came back the next day, finished the recording, was pretty happy with it, and now 4 months later I have to play it live in front of 5,000 people a day on Warped Tour. So I hope I'm prepared. You got your work
cut out for you.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun summer.
Yeah, you still have a few days to practice.
I'm on vacation, and my girlfriend wants to kill me because I should be just vacationing and kicking my feet back, but I brought my pedals with me. And so downstairs below our beach house, I have my pad set up, and I'm spending like 20 minutes a day just working on patterns.
Well, if she's dating a drummer, she's got to, you know, at least accept 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, I think
Comes
she's
with
okay.
territory. What bands would you like to tour or collaborate with that you have not had the opportunity to do so yet?
Can they be bands that we'll never tour with?
Why not?
That are outside of our genre? Okay.
Why not? Yeah.
Brad Paisley, Muse, Coldplay. That'll never happen. So we'll just, yeah, we'll go over here. Between the Bird and Me is a band we've toured with a lot. They're easily my favorite metal band. Blake Richardson, their drummer, has been my main influence for a decade. So he's the best. If you haven't heard Between the Bird and Me or Blake Richardson, check him out.
We actually, for any Between the Bird and Me fans, we actually have a class taught by Jamie King, their engineer, and Tommy. So check that out if you get a chance. Go to creativelive.com/audio. It's called Studio Pass with Tommy Rogers and Jamie King. So if you are a fan, you will like that. Sorry, go on.
No, I'd rather plug them for half an hour than say anything about August Burns Red. They've been single-handedly the biggest thing for me. And I'll say this too. If you want to get good at drums, take lessons, sure, that's a good idea. Watch a bunch of YouTube videos, instructional videos. That's a good idea. That's kind of a new idea, too. But also, try to find a band that pushes you, and don't let it depress you, make you want to quit playing your instrument. Make it, I don't know, inspire you in a way where you hear something different in their playing or their sound, and it just lights you up and makes you want to get behind your instrument. That's what Between the Bird and Me has always been. Whenever I'm bummed out on my playing or I don't know what to do next, I'll throw on a Between the Bird and Me record, and an hour later I have all these new ideas. It's very important to think bigger than yourself, your own playing, your own band. Your band might be great, you're doing all these new and innovative things, but if you're not looking elsewhere, then you're going to be a one-trick pony.
Yeah, I feel like almost without exception, the best bands in any given genre, not that they don't respect their peers, but their peers in the genre are not where they're drawing inspiration from. You know, Suicide Silence is not going home and listening to Carnifex all day. You know what I mean? It's just they're listening to whatever, and that's what makes them so special. So I think that idea of drawing from outside influence is so key, and that's the thing that a lot of people miss out on.
That's right.
Really good question here from Andy, which is something I struggle with too, is I've tried playing along to songs, but I get confused with the drums in the song. How should I handle this? So to me, that means like, I don't necessarily, when I'm listening to a song, I can't necessarily always figure out exactly what the drummer is doing. If I want to learn it, if I want to play along to that, what should I do?
I think some drummers just have skill to be able to do that. I'm not one of those drummers. I'm not a good cover drummer. A drummer that is good at that is Luke Holland. There's a bunch of other guys out there who are very good at hearing something and having the patience, above all, to sit down and listen to it. I don't have that patience. I would rather sit down and write my own thing. So
I just kind of use it as a starting point. I go, I can't really figure out what he's doing in that fill, but whatever, I'm just going to write something of my own that kind of feels the same way.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
Well, I guess on that note, question from Christian Frank. What is your best inspiration while writing drum parts? So how do you write?
I spend a couple hours a day. I treat it like a work day. I get there in the morning in my practice space. I usually don't like to write in my own house. I like to get in my car. I like to drive to the location, have my cup of coffee with me on my computer, and treat it like a work day. I don't leave until I'm checking out at 3 p.m. or something. So that's starter number one. You know, you're not always going to love playing drums. It's not always going to feel exciting and fun and exhilarating. So you have to treat it like it's more than just a hobby if you want to progress and take it to the next level.
It's just like an athlete. You know, the athlete doesn't always necessarily, I guarantee you LeBron doesn't enjoy playing basketball every day, you know, but that's his job. He's got to show up and he's got to put in his X number of hours a day to get better and stay ahead of the competition.
That's right. Yes, in a way, it is a lot like being an athlete. Secondly, I would say never be afraid to try things that you sort of, you know, turn your nose at. Like, there are certain things in music that are sort of taboo as a drummer, and we all know what they are, those of us that are drummers. For example, you don't play a thrash beat with your right hand and your left hand without playing all those 16th notes on your right hand. You play all of them and you put your snare drum on the end.
Right.
I don't know. Try to switch up whatever cymbal you're hitting and maybe it'll sound cool. And you kind of have to get over yourself for a bit, try some new stuff. And I found a lot of the cooler fills or cooler beats that I've come up with have been as a result of me just like looking past the barrier I had and trying it. And if it sucks, then there's no one listening. Who cares?
Question about recording, which I'm really interested in because you know you guys have recorded with Adam D at Audio Hammer with a lot of great people. What's your favorite part of the recording process, and what have you learned about recording from working with so many great people?
My favorite part is taking what I practiced for months and months and putting it all in front of me and in my ears. Up until then, it seems kind of arbitrary. You go home every day and you put in all this work, and it doesn't seem all that satisfying. And then when you get into the studio, 4 or 5 days, all that work comes together, and it's in front of you, and you can just enjoy it for what it is at that point. So I'd say that's my favorite part. I've learned a lot. I've learned that when I leave the studio, to shut the door and just leave it at work. If I had a bad day at the studio, it's hard for me not to let it affect everything else in my life. I usually do. But I'm trying to get better at not basing my mood or my identity on my performance. We all do it, you know, in some capacity, but try to just realize that you have your good days and your bad days, and it's just a reality. So you got to work through your bad days, and you got to, you know, cherish your good days.
Well, one thing I'd be interested to hear you talk about is, because I know that you are a dedicated practicer, and not everybody is. Some people just kind of show up at the studio and they kind of learn it as they go. Can you talk about how important it is to show up at the studio prepared, whether that means just practicing all your parts or actually having done pre-pro, but either way, the importance of walking in the door, like being ready to go? Yeah. And what a difference that makes in the quality of the finished output?
Mm-hmm. There are always going to be drummers or musicians who play in their basement and have a great time doing it. That's fine. That's a great thing. Sometimes I envy that, actually, because when drumming is your career, it's not always your hobby. When drumming is your hobby, you could take a week or two off and who cares? You can't do that when it's your job. But if you want to progress and make it your job, you have to be the kind of drummer, the kind of musician that is willing to put in the time and practice the parts that people, you know, would kind of like cover up if they heard you practicing because it sounds so bad. You have to do that. And you ask any athlete that, you ask anyone that is in a professional capacity how they got there, they're never going to tell you it just came to them and that it came easily. And if they do say that, it's not going to last long and they're not going to really cherish it. So if you want it to be your job and you want to be a professional, you have to put in the 10,000 hours.
And not just on the fun parts.
And not just on the fun parts. Yeah, I think what's important too is don't always practice what you're good at. If someone's listening outside your practice room, are they hearing parts that you're like getting 2 seconds into and repeating? Because they should be. It's not very fun to practice, but if you're just playing the same thing you always play, then it's not practice, it's just fun.
Yeah. Well, another good question from David Martinez Jr., which I'm curious about too, because this is something that's hard for me. How do you go from doing a paradiddle on the snare to putting it on the kit?
I guess using it, I guess looking at your hands and using a mirror, you know, like you'd be looking at your right hand and you just mirror it with your feet. I think a lot of times it's just trying it. I think it's like rocket science or anything. But I don't actually use a lot of rudiments on my feet. You know, I'll use doubles and stuff. But I think a lot of that stuff is just kind of cool to do. I don't actually use it in my performances with Orchestra Madrid. Now, if your foot's going to be on the pedal and then your left foot's going to be on the hi-hat, then I think it has more of an application. And it's actually easier to practice that way because there's two different sounds going on.
Right.
So I'd recommend practicing it on two different sounds. I also recommend practicing anything on two different drums or cymbals because you can hear the definition in what you're doing, and it's a lot of times more musical.
Got a couple questions about your drum company. I actually didn't know until I was researching for this that it even existed. So maybe you could tell people a little bit about it. Two things in particular that I thought were cool about it is that the visual identity, like of the branding, is very kind of distinctive and really different from what you would expect from a guy in a quote-unquote metal band. So can you kind of introduce everybody to the company and talk about like what your vision for it is and the direction and tone and voice and all that stuff, where that came from?
Sure, that's a great question. I started GreinerKilmer in 2011. I was doing Warped Tour at the time. I met a kid named Caleb. He's from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he's an engineer. He's a very, very, very smart kid. He showed me a drum that he built out of drumsticks. And when he showed me the drum, he said, I could show you how to build these drums too. I have a lot of ideas. And I said, well, sure. I'd like to know how to build them before we start a company, if we start a company. So I learned how to build snares for 3 months after Warped Tour in 2011, and we started the company. My last name is Greiner. My friend Caleb's last name is Kilmer, so it's called GreinerKilmer. And all the drums that we make are made in Bainbridge, Pennsylvania, pretty close to Lancaster. We started off making snare drums 3 years, and now we're making full kits. And the process is unique in that we're using, instead of using plies, which a ply is just, it's a thin piece of veneer. It's just a layer of wood that's glued next to another piece of layer of wood. We actually use blocks, like building blocks. We glue them together, and we have a lathe, and they go through a whole process. But they start off with just a piece of lumber that we source locally. And
now, when you say we, does that mean that you are hands-on with the construction of all these drums?
I am not hands-on with the construction. My job is to market and promote the company.
Gotcha. But you did learn how.
I learned how in the beginning, yeah. Because if I'm going to be a part of a company, I need to know how it works. Caleb is the brains. All credit goes to him.
Gotcha.
But he's been able to build this brand or build this look that is so different from most other drums on the market.
Yeah.
I play one of our snare drums, and the drummer for Texas in July plays one of our drum kits. The drummer for Usher plays one of our snare drums. So it's something that has some reach, but mostly it's just about building a product that is quality and has value that drummers can hang on to and cherish for a long time.
I asked Matt Halpern about them, by the way. He said they're great drums, so for whatever his opinion is worth, which I think is a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's great.
Cool. So we got time for a couple more questions. Question from Stephen C. Shapiro. Try saying that 5 times fast. What's a good quote-unquote music city to move to without any previous contacts? I'm coming from a cover band city and looking for more original music to be involved in. So I guess the first question would be, do you need to move? And second, if you're going to move, how should you go about that?
I'm not a great person to answer this question because I'm from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Which is not rock and roll central.
Yeah. I would pass this question, but I'll do my best to answer it. I think it's a lot more about who you're playing with than where you're living in. So some of my friends, I would recommend that they move to LA because they should be studio drummers and they should be playing for Katy Perry and Taylor Swift. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you put your head out and you show what you're worth. I just had a buddy actually fly out to LA to try out for Shania Twain, and he was in a room with the drummer for America's Got Talent, the drummer for Carrie Underwood, and some other guy. He's not going to be able to do that if he doesn't fly out there.
Right.
If you're trying to start your own band, don't go to Nashville or LA trying to get the job. Start locally, find some guys that play, and I think you'll figure out a lot more about what you like and dislike, who you're good at playing with, and who you need to work on locally. And you'll save yourself a lot of grief because it's expensive to move. It's hard to build connections in a new place. And I would recommend just trying to start that locally.
Cool. Well, got time for one last question here. I have a GreinerKilmer Wild Horse snare. What coat would you recommend for the studio?
Thank you for the purchase, first of all. That's my favorite of our snare drums. I've had a lot of... I've tried a couple different snare heads on that. I would just recommend like a coated Ambassador. You'll have to change the head every hour or something if you're playing it pretty hard, but I don't think you can beat that light crack that thing provides. You'll have a little crater in the middle of your snare drum if you're playing it right. But it's my favorite snare drum in the studio, so the Ambassador coated.
Cool. Well, we are about out of time, but Matt, thank you so much for joining us. To find out more about what he's going to be doing this summer with the Entertainment Institute, go to thinktei.com and check him out on Warped Tour, and we'll hope to see you then.
Thank you, Finn. Thank you, guys.